Welcome back inside the Parisi Palace, high above 2919 East Broadway. This is hour number 2 of the Jake Feinberg Show. Coming to you live on Power Talk. Please go to our website, powertalk.live. Download our free app to your smartphone. Stream live from your computer. We're full on extraterrestrial radio, and we thank you for making us part of your day today. Without further ado, I'd like to continue on my mission, interviewing as many of the original Merry Pranksters as possible. And the cat that I'm about to bring on is also a serious drummer in his own right. Started cultivating his chops with the Pranksters. It carries on today with Ken Kesey and the Further Bus. George Walker, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Hi, this is George.
How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. I'd like to correct one thing, though.
Go.
I have moved on from drums. I now play an instrument of my own creation called the axophone.
Can you talk about that? Can you please describe what the axophone is?
Probably not, but I'll do my best.
Yeah, sure. No problem.
It's fairly indescribable. It looks like an axe, and it also looks kind of like a saxophone, and it plays more like a kazoo. And people seem to be interested by it when I play it. And there actually are some bands that will let me play with them now, so I must be getting better.
What kind of I hate genres, but do you find yourself more comfortable in a folk setting or a rock, jazz? What kind of, where does that instrument?
Well, I like jazz the best. You know, I'm old. When I grew up in the 50s, the music I listened to was what they then called progressive jazz, and of course rock and roll came along later, and I got interested in that. But I really relate closest to jazz, and when I listen to music, that's what I listen to, and when I write, I put on jazz music and try to write to the rhythms.
Well, you're talking to an old soul in the Jake Feinberg Show, 38 years old. But I want to talk to you specifically when you talk about progressive jazz of the 50s. You're referring to Stan Levy on the West Coast. You're referring to Shelly Manne. You're referring to Kenny Clark. Let's break down specifically.
Well, all of those, my favorites were Coltrane, Miles Davis, Roland Kirk, a lot of the really far-out people, Ornette Coleman, just on and on and on, long list. Art Blakey was one of my favorite drummers, along with Elvin Jones, that played with Coltrane.
But in the fifth, that was
Dizzy Gillespie.
Yeah,
They played in the
50s
and into the 60s.
Well, you know what I'm getting at is that the 50s was really out of swing into bebop. That was bebop.
Yep. So I listened to a lot of bebop.
So talk about what was attractive to you about the bebop rhythm specifically, because what you're talking about with Ornette, Rahsaan, Train, and Elvin, that stuff didn't occur till the mid to late 60s. So I want to go back.
A little earlier than that.
Yeah, I'm sorry, early 60s. You're right. That it was considered hate music by white writers like me.
Yeah, I saw Ornette Coleman at the Monterey Jazz Festival in 1961. When I was still in college in the late 50s, I would a couple times drove to San Francisco to see Coltrane play at the Jazz Workshop in San Francisco, and that would have been 59 or 60. So they were going then.
Let's just talk about what
Sure.
put me in that. I want to go back to that time, and specifically the stage presence of these cats and how the nonverbal communication on the bandstand, and what most inspired you about these cats. I know it's a several-part question.
That is several parts.
It's like an axophone.
Well,
it's like an axophone.
there was a huge broad spectrum of what you call stage demeanor, from Dizzy Gillespie, who just would really relate to the crowd, and Ornette Coleman, Rahsaan Roland Kirk. I saw him before he added the Rahsaan to his name. In fact, when I first saw him, he was playing with Dizzy Gillespie at the Jazz Workshop, and I was so blown away by it. It wasn't like any jazz event I had ever witnessed.
What was it like?
Jazz was usually people sit around being real cool, kind of quiet and digging the music and stuff.
Uh-huh.
This was different. It was like a rock concert. People were jumping up and down and dancing and standing on their chairs and just going crazy. It was insane music. And I was so impressed, I went and got Kesey and went back the next night. Kesey was so impressed that he went and met him and invited him out to La Honda, which he did, and they took acid together.
Kesey and Roland Kirk took acid together.
Yes, they did.
This is, I mean, George Walker's already blowing and by the way, we're broadcasting worldwide. Roland Kirk. Now, okay, Dizzy, at that time, Dizzy was one of the greatest vocabulary creators of vocabulary of bebop, but were they playing bebop, or was Rahsaan?
Oh, they were beyond that. There was still an element of that, that fast, hard driving rhythm.
Sure.
But no, it was psychedelic. They were getting into stuff that I think was a lot of the precursor to what Garcia did on guitar with the Dead. Jerry listened to hours and hours and hours of Coltrane. And really modeled his playing a lot after Coltrane and a lot of those jazz musicians, and I'm sure he was influenced by all of those cats.
This is really important. Can you talk about I listened to Jerry. I know Jerry was actually a Charlie Parker freak as well.
Very much, yes, very much so. We all were.
Yeah.
Charlie Parker was incredible.
And he died so young that he never had a chance to sell out and play with Kenny G or anything. He just always played just his freaking burning music.
Kesey had a quote that he liked to ascribe to Bird. He said that Charlie Parker, Bird as he was called, was playing on stage, and I guess it was some kind of an open thing, an open jam session, and other cats were coming up and playing. And some young cat came up and blew about 1 million notes and was playing all over the place and all the rapid-fire stuff. And Bird just kind of watched him for a while and listened to him. And when he took a little break, Bird says to him, "I'm hip, you can twiddle your fingers, man, but can you play the blues?"
Right.
And I don't know if that's true, but that's something I heard Kesey quote him more than once, and it sure sounded right to me.
I mean, can you, for the layperson out there, I'm not a musician, you explain what Bird meant by that?
Well, yeah. Technically the guy, he was fast. He could play a whole lot of stuff. And I know people like this. They play all over the place. But is there any real soul to the music? Where's the melody behind it? Where's the blues melodies? Where's the stuff that really flows, that swings behind all that stuff? It's one thing to be technically proficient, but if you don't have any soul, it doesn't swing. And that's what he was talking about.
Don't you think that we are, just stepping back for a minute, I don't think you could have articulated better the time that we're living through as it relates to melodic improvisation, i.e. jazz. In my first interview with Babs, he talked about jazz today being more like symphonic music, where it's just a lot of perfection, a lot of technical chops, not a lot of feel, not a lot of soul.
Yeah, where's the blues, man?
Where's the blues?
Some blues, man.
So so can you, Rahsaan? So there was that hard driving rhythm, but was he doing the multi horns in the mouth at that?
Oh yeah, most definitely.
Was that the first time you'd ever seen? And you never saw that before? That was the first time.
I'd never seen. I had never even heard of him before. This was in like maybe 62 or 3. I can't be sure. Probably 63, because I think it was Kesey was in La Honda by then, and so that would have been 63. But I'd never even heard of him, and when I saw this cat, and the little guy, he's blind, he can't see a thing,
sure.
And he gets up there, and these horns aren't just ordinary horns. I think he did have either a tenor or an alto sax, but everything else was stuff that he'd put together from bits and pieces of various stuff, various different kinds of pawn shop horns and stuff, and he'd somehow wired them and taped them and stuck them together and made them play, so that everything was in key, everything was melodic, and he was playing real music, but it was wild and crazy. It was like nothing I've ever seen before or since. Other than him.
Talking to George Walker here on the Jake Feinberg Show, and can you talk about going to Jimbo's Bop City and going to these late night jam sessions? Did you ever have the gall? When was the first time you had the gall to get up on the bandstand with a group and try to play jazz?
Oh boy, that was much later. Within the last 5 years, probably. Well, I tried a little bit when we started doing the Twister show with Kesey and Babs and all of us.
What was the Twister show? I don't know what that is.
Okay, Kesey wrote a musical play, a tragic comedy about the end of the world, more or less, and we were all in it. And because it was a musical, I played the Tin Man. It had, among several other themes, it had a sort of Wizard of Oz theme. At least some of the characters from the Wizard of Oz were in it. And I played Tin Man, so, of course, being Tin Man, I got to carry an axe. And as you know from jazz, a lot of the jazz musicians referred to their instrument as their axe. And so I'd made up a stage axe, and I had an old junk saxophone lying around, so I took a lot of the keys off of it and screwed them onto the handle of the axe and taped a kazoo to the handle end of it, and that was what I played.
Wow.
And the song that I played was a Bobby Timmons tune called "Moanin'," which is a jazz tune.
Oh my God! Are you kidding me?
No, I'm telling you straight, man. And the and the words to it were Lambert Hendricks and Ross. John Hendricks wrote words to that song. Every morning find me moaning 'cause of all the trouble I see, and on like that. And so besides singing it, I did instrumentals to it, and that was my first attempt at doing jazz. And that wasn't very good at all. But over the years, I kept listening and trying, and I've got to the point where, like I say, there's quite a few bands out there that actually let me play with them.
You know, I'm looking at it here. It was a 1999 play by Ken Kesey here. Well, let's see. You know, I guess the question I had, I interviewed John Hendricks a couple years ago.
Did you really?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
no, I've gone real deep in it. Well, he was out in. I mean, I'm curious. Did you go to the Trident? I guess that was what I wanted to talk to you about. Is that you went to the workshop? Where else did you experience transcendent moments when you realized
I saw Miles at the old Blackhawk Club.
Was it during the Saturday night sessions when he cut those? Can you talk about that?
You know, probably. But I don't really know. I mean, I just remember going and listening to the music. It was just, you know, a nightclub. It was the Blackhawk was a really interesting place because the stage was kind of in the middle, and they had audiences on kind of both sides. And one side was a regular kind of a nightclub where they served drinks and stuff for adults. But they had another section over on the other side where underage people could go, and they didn't serve alcohol. But that way, you know, teenagers could go and listen to jazz. And it was an amazing concept that I don't know if anybody's done it since.
Well, it was called the Peanut Gallery, right?
No, it was called the Blackhawk Club.
No, I mean the place that was.
Oh, the place you mean? Because there was a place called the Peanut Gallery or something like that.
The cordoned off place for underage people. Yeah,
it could have been called. I don't recall that. That very well could be. I don't know that.
I wanted to ask, you know, this is important. You know, as far as the pranksters are concerned, you know, can you talk about how inspiring the improvisation of these jazzers were at the time to the poetry and the conceptual stuff that you guys were doing as far as like trying to enlighten and trying to improvise and trying to inspire? I mean, there may not be a direct link, but can you talk about their influence on the pranksters?
Well, it's all related. You know, there has been this kind of river of consciousness that we've all kind of put our feet into to get wet, and jazz is part of it. Rock and roll is part of it. Psychedelics are part of it, the pranksters and the bus trip, it's all part of the same stuff. And what it's all really about, and I've been talking about this a lot, I just came back from a tour last month with a film that was made of Zane's tour a couple years ago.
Absolutely.
And I've been doing Q&A sessions with crowds and stuff like that and talking to people. And one of the themes that I really hammered on people is that what this is all about is raising your consciousness. It's about altered states of consciousness and getting your mind to a higher state. I think that we're in dire shape. Humanity is, you know, we're headed toward a cliff, and we're we're marching off the edge. I think that we need to really seriously reevaluate where we're going. And I think the only way you do it, nobody changes the world. You only can change yourself and hope that somebody notices. And if you change yourself for the better, then maybe when somebody notices, they'll pick up on it and they'll change themselves to the better. And that's really about all we can do. But what it's about, and what all of it's about, is getting to different states of mind, different states of consciousness. And improvisation is a way of freeing up your mind of that. Musical improvisation is one of the ways you free your mind. Taking psychedelic drugs is another way. Doing all these things at once is a really good way because you're really going to get out there. But what it's about, and I'm really convinced of this, what it's about is evolving our consciousness. And it doesn't happen all in a lifetime. I think that we probably have to reincarnate over and over again. But if you go out aiming to be better, I think there's a pretty good chance you'll come back being better.
George, I mean, that was you really waxed poetic there, but let's just get down to the brass tacks. What you're really talking about is LSD.
Well, LSD isn't the only one. Mescaline and peyote, magic mushrooms have been around for thousands and thousands of years. Ancient cultures all over the world have found lots of different compounds that have these psychedelic effects, these consciousness-altering effects.
Absolutely. So consciousness-altering effects. And this is so important because I am a huge proponent on this show of consciousness-altering effects from anything, from any types of drugs, and explain, if you would, how it changed your internal system, and how it would slow our running off the cliff as a culture, as a society.
Well, that's two pretty different questions, pretty different subjects. I'll take the first one first.
Mm-hmm.
My first real psychedelic experience was with peyote in about 1961, and miracle of miracles, I was in the Bay Area, and it snowed on Perry Lane that night.
Wow!
If you can imagine that,
No,
I think it's happened once.
Wow.
Perry Lane, for those who don't know, is in Menlo Park, Palo Alto, near Stanford University campus, which is where not only Kesey, but decades of very far-out people had lived in these little hovels that were remnants of, I think, World War I housing. And so it was cheap and communal because there was a bunch of them. And for decades, a lot of the real avant-garde people of all stripes had lived on Perry Lane. And Kesey was among the last because when he left was about the time they tore it all down and built suburban housing. But anyway, there's Perry Lane, and the night I took peyote, sure enough, it snowed on Perry Lane that night. And that was, I thought, in some ways kind of validating. But it was really LSD that really cranked my mind around. I had taken some other things by then. I'd taken some psilocybin, the compound from mushrooms, and I'd taken a lot of peyote, but it was 1964 before I actually got my hands on any real LSD, and it was more powerful. And the thing that was really immediately noticeably different was the visual perceptions, the color perceptions were so intense that it did something to my mind. It made me realize that the world was an incredibly beautiful place if you could find out how to look at it. And I wanted to see more. I wanted to see that, and I realized that my life would be going in a different direction from that day on, and it did. What was the rest of the question?
We'll save the second half of the question. There's a couple of things that perked up from the first one. How did when you took the peyote and it snowed on Perry Lane? How did you said that validated it? How did it validate it?
It was a mystical thing. Nobody expects snow on Perry Lane or anywhere in mid-California, not in the mountains. We were down at sea level practically. And, we're doing this thing to change our minds. And then on in the middle of the night, we're just having a good time, and it's all very interesting and fun, and things look different and feel different. But then when it started snowing, that somehow made me realize things really are different. There's this difference that exists in the world that you can tune into. And I don't know if you can turn it on. I think you probably can if you learn. I think people can probably actually just throw the switch and make things different once they achieve that state. I don't know that, but I believe it. But seeing things become different,
right?
Seeing it snow where it had snowed once in 100 years or something, it made me realize something about. And I didn't think, wow, we did this or anything like that at all. I just thought, wow, yeah, things are different. This is not at all the way life usually is. And so I realized that it was effective, that it really made me see things in a way that I hadn't been seeing them.
And the other sub question that popped up was when you took acid, you realized it was heavier drug. It was heavier, and you started to get these visuals and colors. Why are these colors so important to abstraction or enlightenment in your mind? I mean, I've been on acid before where you just get these 3D prisms of visuals that are just incredible, and they're scary in some ways. But the first thing you talked about was colors. Why are colors significant?
Oh, it's kind of the first thing that happens. Right away. I mean, as soon as it comes on, everything immediately starts looking different. You feel different, but I'd been used to kind of feeling different. I'd started out drinking when I was in high school,
right.
and you feel different, and then started smoking weed, and then you feel different, and took peyote, and you feel different, and took some of these other strange things that Kesey had gotten from the MK Ultra program when he was the guinea pig for a lot of those experiments, and he took some stuff home with him, and we were all partaking of that stuff, and you always felt different. LSD was much more vivid. There's some of these other things were somewhat subtle. You'd feel different. You'd think differently. Things would look a little off, but not radically. But with LSD, boy, there wasn't any question about it. And we had the real stuff. We had somehow connected. I only found out only in the last few years how it happened, but we did connect with some real Sandoz Laboratory pharmaceutical grade LSD. It was the real stuff. And I still maintain that nothing I've ever taken since, other than more of that, was quite the same.
How did you connect with them?
Well, I had a roommate in Berkeley before when I was going to school there a year or two before that, and he was an extremely small-time dealer. An ounce of weed occasionally, or something else if he had it. Maybe a couple of pills or something. I mean, he wasn't what you call a dealer. He was a student at Berkeley. But the reason I even mentioned that was at one point he got busted, and the headline in the San Francisco Chronicle said, "Mr. Big busted in Berkeley." And I looked and it was my friend, and I laughed because, I mean, this guy was so far from being a big-time dealer. I think he probably sold a few $100s worth of drugs in his entire career, or maybe a couple $1,000s worth at most. I mean, he was by no means a serious drug dealer, and he was so far from being Mr. Big that it was just seriously laughable. But he called me up one day and said, "Hey, I've got some LSD, and you'd mentioned you'd like to try some. I've got some." And so I went up and saw him, and I got some. And I brought it back to La Honda. I was hanging out at Kesey's, and a bunch of friends were there, Babs and Hagen, and I don't remember who all, but quite a lot of us. I think Roy was there, and so we all took it. And it turned out that was the day of the Great Alaska Earthquake.
Wow. And
it was also the day that the Merry Pranksters were born. So it was quite a momentous occasion.
Wow, that is a mind blower right there.
And this is all stuff that I've written, and also it turned out that, and this is what I found out many years later, was that my friend in Berkeley was one of the people. Tim Leary had come around through California looking for people to turn on, to turn more people on. He was looking for essentially dealers, because he couldn't be the guy going around, turning everybody on. He still had his position at Harvard, but he had realized that it's time to get this thing moving, time to start the tune in, turn on, and drop out movement. And so he found a few people around the Bay Area that he could give the stuff to, who would then get it around to others. And I finally figured out that my friend was one of those people. But I didn't figure that out until probably the last 5 years.
It's interesting because I never knew that Leary was. I assume it makes sense, but just to be clear, I mean, the cats that were doing acid up in New York with Leary, that was really in isolation, right? And the West Coast was much more of about a group trip. Is that right?
Well, that's what it seemed like to me. We did go to Millbrook with the bus in '64 when we went to New York. We went up to Millbrook and visited them, and that's a well-documented event. And yeah, they were kind of sequestered in this big old mansion that I can't think of their name right now. Part of the Mellon family, I think. That was Hitchcock. It was the Hitchcocks who I think were Mellon family people, big time New York bankers from 19th century. And they had this big old mansion up in Millbrook that had ended up in their hands, and they had become friends with Tim and had essentially given them the use of the place to hang out and do what they were doing when they weren't at Harvard doing things on campus and teaching. And so that was kind of their hangout. But yeah, we were just kind of running wild out here on the West Coast. It's kind of Wild West. I mean,
that's what I'm saying is like Leary was looking to turn people on. He didn't necessarily care what it looked like in terms of whether it was a bathtub full of liquid acid and hundreds of people. He was just looking to turn people on, or was it because he realized that in isolation acid wasn't the greatest thing to take?
I never talked to him about that, and I don't know. No, I don't think that was it. They continued to do it. I don't think that they were in total isolation. I don't know. Well, probably some people just took it by themselves. I've actually done that. I took acid by myself once or twice. Mm-hmm. It's a lot more fun with other people. And they were doing it in small groups, I think. I don't really know. I never was at any of their sessions. That time we went there, they were just coming down from a session, but, we didn't really get into what they were doing. So, everything that I know about that is just what I've read or heard, or and all that is probably third and fourth hand at best, and a lot of speculation and reports of people who knew people and that sort of thing. So I really don't know what they were doing. But I did know Dick Alpert quite well, and did take acid with him a couple times. And, it was just in small groups, just hanging around the house and getting high and having a good time.
You talking about Ram Dass?
Yes.
You knew Ram Dass well?
Yes, I did.
Because Barlow said he was a snake oil salesman for a long time, early on. I was just curious about your impression. Barlow was referring to the April experiment, and but I'm just curious if you could talk.
I don't know what that is. The April experiment.
I mean the what went on at I believe it was Boston University on Easter when they gave Sibocillin to the purest stuff to half the group, and then kind of a jaded amount to another group, and then the group that took the pure stuff, it was spearheaded by Leary and Albert, a.k.a. Ram Dass. And
I know nothing about that. This is the first I've ever even heard of it.
Well, I'll get some more information for it. So tell me, I mean, Ram Dass has become a pretty folkloric figure, but I mean, at that time, he was doing a lot of acid. Can you talk about your relationship with him?
We were just friends. He had acid. We were friends. I got acid from him a couple times back when it was still legal. He was connected because of his work at Harvard. He was connected to somebody that was connected to Sandoz somewhere in Europe. I think it was in Eastern Europe, in Czechoslovakia, because the Soviets at that time were doing far more with it than Americans were. The government was involved, and most of that was going on in Czechoslovakia. And I think that was where they went to get their volume supplies of it. And I'm not sure of that, but that's what I believe.
What I'm sorry, what country in Europe did you mention?
Czechoslovakia.
Yeah, no, this is because Dave, who told me, I forget who I was talking to.
That's pretty well known.
No, but I mean, it was the idea that like in the chemistry students in the labs in England, McLaughlin, I think John McLaughlin, they were just that was their assignments was to make acid in the universities. The Harvard Sibocillin Project was a series of experiments in psychology conducted by Timothy Leary and Dr. Richard Alpert. The founding board of the project consisted of Leary, Aldous Huxley, Leary's superior at Harvard, and then so the Marsh Chapel experiment was run by the Harvard Divinity School, and let's see. Boston area graduate divinity students were administered Sibocillin as part of a study designed to determine if the drug could facilitate the experience of profound religious state. 9 out of 10 of the divinity students reported such experiences.
I have heard of this. Now that you read that to me, I have heard of that. But having heard of it is about as far as I know. I don't really know anything about that. Most of my experience with psychedelics was much more involved in taking them than it was in studying about them.
Absolutely. Well, again, these students were looking for religious experiences, and they certainly got them. George, can you talk about the Longshoremen's Hall and playing in these sort of free-form jams? I was talking to Babs just before you came. I was talking to him part 2 of our interview when he was talking about this guy Dan Buchla, who kind of created the
Buchla.
Buchla
was a electronics guy. He was one of the first guys to make synthesizers.
Yes.
And he built something, the Buchla machine, that you could plug it into a sound system and it would create all kinds of sounds, and you could run sound through it and it would do all kinds of manipulations to sounds. And we had one of the earliest of them that he may have given it to us. I don't know. I don't remember him personally, but I think he and Kesey were friends, and he and Babs were friends. You probably know more than that, having talked to Babs about that. But we had this thing that it was just some of our gear that we used to make things different and strange.
Can you talk about your contributions, especially behind the drum kit?
Well, our music, what I have told people repeatedly, in fact, in this recent tour, I frequently quoted Kesey as having said on several occasions that he would rather play in the worst band in the world than listen to the best band. And then he proved it by playing in the worst band in the world, which was the Merry Pranksters band. We were absolutely horrible. We were so bad. We really didn't know how to play music at all. Plus, we would be really, really high, and if we had ever known how to play music, we would have forgotten. And so we were just this disjointed bunch of noise that occasionally we'd get into some kind of a groove, and it would vaguely resemble music, but that didn't happen very often, and it usually didn't last very often. And so we weren't really popular as a musical group. I think that what popularity we have gleaned out of all that probably has to do a lot more with just pioneering the experience than it did with anything we did musically, because we were undeniably bad.
Right, but let's aside from the musicianship of it, I mean, it was an integral part to I believe staying in the moment and dealing with attitude and overcoming disappointment, and then ultimately, like, can you just talk about inspiring regular peeps when you were on the road?
Yes, because what I think Kesey was really aiming to do with the acid test. I think that the primary goal of everything is raising consciousness. Just, altered states of consciousness was always the goal of everything that we ever did. But more specifically than that, he had expressed a desire to try to eliminate the line between performer and audience in all this stuff. It was an attempt to make it participatory rather than just going and witnessing something happening. You know, if you go to a concert, you listen to the music, maybe you dance, but you don't get up on stage, and if you do, they throw you off. It wasn't a thing where you would really become part of the show. And with the acid tests, we were consciously trying to do a thing where we would blur that line, where the people that were just there could become part of the show. They could become an integral part of what was happening. And that was the hope, was that people would somehow find their way into a participatory role in the thing. And so our music was kind of a way to show people you don't have to be good at something to do it. All you have to do is just do it. And so, you know, I think it succeeded to a large degree. I think that it really worked. You know, a lot of times that line really broke down at the acid test, and people would wander up on stage and start playing with us and stuff. We kind of alternated musical sets. Well, I use the term musical quite loosely there. With the Dead, they would play for a while and then they'd take a break. And when they were playing, everybody get into the music and dance and all that stuff because they were really good and they could actually play music. And you know, it was music people could recognize as music. It had rhythm and words and notes and harmonies and all that stuff that music has. Whereas then we'd take the stage, and frequently people would start getting uncomfortable because they couldn't really quite see it as music or anything else for that matter, other than just, you know, a bunch of crazy people making a bunch of noise. And a lot of people would leave. And we finally realized, you know, one of our roles in taking the stage like that and taking over was to kind of winnow out the people that just couldn't get into it.
I dig. Yeah, I did.
And so years later, we got better and better at it. Years later, I told Kesey, you know, we've really improved. You know, back in the day, we used to drive people away by the hundreds. Now we're driving them away by the thousands.
I mean, can you talk about that early incarnation of the Dead, specifically the drumming style of Bill Kreutzmann?
I'll tell you what. Very briefly, Jerry told me one time, says, musically, Bill is tops. That's a Garcia quote. Musically, Bill is tops. He was an outstandingly good drummer.
What do you think he meant by that?
He was really good. He said that there's hardly anybody any better. He was as good a drummer as you're going to find. When they took on the second drummer, Mickey Hart, Mickey was a different kind of a drummer. He had been, as a kid, a contest-winning drummer. You know, they have these drumming contests for little kids. You know, if you can do all of the rudiments fast and in sequence and all this stuff, and really perform everything flawlessly. That was how he started as a drummer. Bill started out as a rock and roll drummer. You know, he wanted to drive a band. And he was taught by another Perry Lane friend of ours, a guy named Lee Anderson, who was a fair drummer in his own right, but was a really bright guy, and he was a science student, I believe, and was a good teacher. And he taught Bill, how to be that drummer he wanted to be. Bill had tremendous talent. He had a lot of natural talent.
Just because he did have a lot of natural talent, and I'm just curious about. Whether you thought that he really was the guy, if Jerry meant that he was tops, because, I mean, I never saw the Dead. I was born in 1978. But Billy really held it all together, because when was there another band that actually was good that had a lead bass player and a lead guitar player? I mean, is that what made him tops, was that he was able to hold it together and then just play, obviously, for 25, 30 minutes at a time?
It could be. You know, I never asked him, what do you mean? I just assumed that he was just telling me quite simply that he thought that Bill was just really, really good. And I didn't disagree with him.
Did you, this teacher he had, were you close with his teacher?
Not real close, but I knew him. We all knew him. He was one of the guys that hung around Perry Lane. We all knew him.
Right. The subset of that question I asked about a half hour ago was when you're browbeaten, and that's the wrong word to use, but when you're talking to cats and trying to inspire them about the fact of how close we are to the cliff, How do you think consciousness-altering substances can help us at least slow it down to a limp or maybe a crawl to the cliff?
I think that it opens up people's minds to alternate possibilities. And until you are open to some kind of an alternate possibility from just all the standard crap that you see on TV and on the internet, that people are telling you it's like this and they're telling you it's like that, and you got to do this and you got to do that, and until you are somehow shaken out of this deluge of information and misinformation and propaganda and all this stuff that they're feeding us that's supposed to manipulate us into doing whatever it is they want us to do, until you can somehow jar yourself free like that, it's really hard to see other possibilities. And I think that's what the value of psychedelic drugs is, as far as moving us forward in human evolution, is it frees people up to start entertaining the notion that there are other ways to view stuff. And then once you get free of all this other stuff that we've been bombarded with, once you get to where, oh wow, your mind is opened up, there is other possibilities, then you can start thinking, you can start seeing, you can start becoming aware. Oh wow, I didn't know about that. As some new idea comes along, rather than saying, well, that doesn't fit what I've been told, and so it makes it much more possible for us to evolve, and we have to evolve one by one. The evolution of the human race is going to happen one human at a time.
Well, that is beautiful. I just wonder if you feel like, the war on drugs by Reagan, which really affected so much more than just drugs, but
it started before Reagan. It started with Nixon, but it really started with Harry Anslinger.
You want to talk about it? I wasn't aware.
Harry Anslinger was some kind of minor federal cop in the 1920s that was on the payroll of the Hearst newspaper fortune, and they had, according to rumors, and it's probably true, they had somewhat tied up a monopoly on newsprint made from wood pulp, and they wanted to demonize hemp, because that was the main competition for what he was doing. And so hemp had the unfortunate little sister of psychedelics, THC, in it. So there, and of course jazz musicians and a lot of the black culture, a lot of the Hispanic culture were using it more than mainstream white America at that time in the 1920s, and so it was really easy to demonize those people with the idea that this was this terribly dangerous thing. It was going to turn everybody into murderers and thieves and rapists and derelicts and all this stuff, which appears not to be true.
Well, it's interesting because like I talked to Babs earlier, and he said that you guys were never. You never had a political agenda. You really were your own commune. And is that when you say people have to affect change in themselves and then one person at a time, do you think that if you were lecturing or talking to people now about it, because of the criminalization and the consequences of, getting busted with this stuff, do you feel like that people have to do it in a commune kind of setting, in the sense that it can't be No,
I don't think that. I think it's everywhere. I think that it's a lot of people are still afraid of it because of the not only the legal consequences, but a lot of people still believe the propaganda. A lot of people still believe what they're told about it, that these things are really dangerous and they'll damage you and in all these terrible ways. And don't get me wrong, there are certainly drugs that will damage you and will really screw you up. Speed can do it. Speed can also be a really useful drug if it's used carefully and wisely, but I'm talking about real amphetamines, not this garbage that they sell on the streets these days that they call meth. I don't have any idea what it is, but I see the results, and it's really bad. And cocaine is another one that is really, you have to be really, really careful of it because it's highly addictive, and it really can alter your consciousness in ways that make you non-productive, and pretty soon all you do is think about cocaine. So that's not good. So there are definitely drugs out there that, and then all the heroin is killing millions of people now. It's just, and the prescription painkillers that people are taking by the handfuls. Drugs are dangerous. A lot of them. You have to be careful. You have to know what you're doing and pay attention. Like anything, it's like crossing the street. You don't cover your eyes and wander out onto the freeway. You pay attention, figure out what's going on before you wander out there.
George, can you talk about an inspiring story from this Zane Kesey further trip that you just came back from?
Yeah, it was very inspiring to me. For those who don't know, 2 years ago was the 50th anniversary of the epic trip that we took with the first further bus in 1964 when we went to New York. And so 2 years ago was the 50th anniversary, and Zane took the current further bus on a long extended tour and went all the way to the East Coast and up into New England, and he was gone for almost 3 months touring around. And what he was doing, as near as I can tell from the film, because I didn't go on the trip, they made a film of it, and Zane and his crew did not make the film. A film crew from Canada, they're called Lotus Eater Films. They did the film, went along with them and did the film, and I've been helping talking about it. Ken Babs and I are both interviewed in the film, and then I talk to people. I've been going to the live showings and doing Q&As and stuff. And we went to several of the places. Zane took the bus to a lot of these festivals. Well, I had no idea that these festivals were even going on. They're everywhere. There is so much stuff going on now that it's small events. They don't get a lot of publicity. The mainstream media tends to ignore them, which I think is probably a really, really good thing,
right?
Because it'll be allowed to grow without being snuffed out at the first breath, as it was in the 60s. And there are lots of them. The thing that was really inspiring to me as I started to go to these things and see them, and we went to some of the same festivals. Some of them go on or annual events. They do these same things year after year at these same places, and they're kind of small. A few hundred to maybe a few thousand people. There's no Woodstocks and Altamonts with 500,000 people, which is good. You try to do anything with 500,000 people, it's a nightmare. It's no fun. So these things are a lot more fun. But the thing that, to me, back to your question, inspiring, was I see so many of these people that are involved in putting these things on. They have their own places. They own land. They have homes. They have families. They have businesses and jobs. They have responsibilities. They have lives, and they're taking care of all that stuff. They're not just a bunch of dropouts landing 500,000 in San Francisco or Woodstock, ready to party without any way to take care of themselves or any sense of where they're going in life. These are all people that have established lives and are taking care of that, and then they go off and they do something for a weekend or a long weekend or maybe even a whole week. They take a vacation and they do these festivals things, and it's going on all over the country. Every weekend, all summer, there must be hundreds of them. There's thousands of these events going on. They're everywhere, and they're well managed, most of them. Some places they get crazy and wild. I've seen some of them where people were too drunk. I've seen places where people took too much bad acid. I did not see a single act of violence. I didn't hear of any theft. I didn't hear of anybody. A few people kind of lost control of themselves, but I didn't hear of anybody that was really damaged. It was amazing. It was inspiring to see how this thing has kind of grown up. It's like the 60s has suddenly come of age. And to me, it's extremely encouraging because there's lots and lots and lots of people doing this. And there are a lot of responsible people, and there are a lot of people that are thinking about what they're doing, and they're making stuff happen. And these are the people that I think are going to lead our evolution into as we get deeper and deeper into the 21st century.
One final question for you, George. I mean, obviously, you've become friends with me on Facebook and subjected to relentless tags of excerpts that I feel like you would be interested in reading. Can you tell me what's inspiring to you about the Jake Feinberg Show?
It's an opportunity to get the message out. Just that simple. We have a message. You said something about how we weren't political. I've become political. I write political stuff. I post stuff. It's important. In fact, I'll throw a little politics at you. This coming election is not about personalities. It's about the Supreme Court. And anybody that doesn't know that, go back and study. The Supreme Court justices are appointed for life, and they tell presidents and Congress what they can and cannot do. Presidents come and go. It's pretty easy to see by now how easy it is to frustrate a president and thwart his agenda. Same with Congress. You have to have 60% of the Senate to really be able to do anything. The Supreme Court takes 5 people, and we have a vacancy that has not been addressed by the Senate. We're going to have probably 1 or 2 more vacancies come up in the next 8 years, and it's absolutely crucial, I think, that the right people get on the Supreme Court, because they're the ones who make the rules, not Congress, not the president. Those guys are just personalities.
Right, and you have cats like Clarence Thomas who have finally opened their mouth after like 10 or 12 years to say something.
And then he said the wrong thing.
Well, of course. Maybe George Walker for the Supreme Court. But
Barack Obama, if he would take the job.
Sure. Well, I mean, he's been stymied, and it's funny how they say he's done nothing and the country's a disaster.
He's done more than almost any president.
But I mean, the truth is
just don't report it.
Well, no, you just explained why he hasn't done anything, because they've stonewalled every single thing he's tried to do.
Every single thing. In fact, they met the night before, the Republican caucus met the night before his inauguration, and they specifically agreed to do exactly that, to do everything they could to keep him from succeeding at anything, even if it was what they wanted.
Right.
Any success by him would be bad for them.
And that's the cynical nature that leads to fascism and another Hitler. So we don't want that.
This is the thing. What we are now facing is a very grave threat of fascism in America.
George, I'd like to have you on for part 2 sometime in the fall to talk politics, maybe after the election.
Yeah, sure. We'll have plenty to say after that, I'm sure.
Much love to you, man, and thank you.
Back at you, man. Much love to you, and much love to everybody out there, every one of you. I love you all, and keep in mind, man, that it's all about love. It's all about openness. That fear and hate are what we have to escape.
Love you, Walker.
That's the message. Love you too.
Keep swinging.
Thanks,
keep swinging, man.
Thanks, Jake.
All right, man. It was a prank. See you, bud. It was a merry prankster day, and part 2 with Ken Babs, part 1 with George Walker. I continue to get deeply entrenched in humanity and love, pushing consciousness forward. Thanks to Mike Roper for running the board. We'll be back next week, final week of August on Power Talk. Please check out our website, download our app, powertalk.live. Just having a ball. Things are cooking, man. And we'll see you next week. Peace.
I've been playing blues for quite a while. I've been around the world a few times, but I don't understand. I just like to play the blues. It's not all the money that I want. I just like to play the blues. And I like for everybody to get together and all of us play the blues. Let's have a good time. Because blues is where it's at. I'm telling you, I love it. I can't help but play it. So when you wake up in the morning,
You're a gig.
and ain't got no money, or no gig, whatever you call it, you ain't got nothing but the blues no way, baby. Or either your old lady gonna do yagging you and arguing with you, telling you what you get up and do something. And go to the steel mill, you know you're gonna do, see, and that's usually the blues too. So sometimes you